In what is surely one of the greatest tragedies that has ever befallen the knowledge of mankind, ever since the burning of the library at Alexandria, I have lost the intro video that I filmed about working on this lamp. I've already done all the work. The lamp is fixed. Ta-da! Now, I've always been fascinated by Aladdin brand kerosene lamps. I like kerosene lamps in general. Let's face it, I like anything that produces light. But in particular, the Aladdin brand of kerosene lamps use a Coleman mantle style mechanism that makes them 6 times brighter than your typical department store kerosene lamp with the little wick that goes up and down. An Aladdin brand lamp gets the fuel to burn at a much higher temperature, and it burns right here on this mantle, and in a process called incandescence, this mantle glows extremely brightly, very much like a Coleman lantern. Aladdin brand lamps are a little bit rare, a little bit collectible. I found this one. This is a Model 6 Aladdin burner on its matching original brass decanter, or whatever you call this part. I found this at a thrift store for $1.01. I was pretty pumped. But it was missing meaningful parts of the burner. In fact, the gear, you turn this knob and the wick goes up and down. The gear that makes the wick carrier go up and down was missing most of its teeth. And the wick carrier itself was missing. And the flame spreader was missing. I thought it would be a fun project to see if I could bring it back to life. So, with that as the backstory, you will pick up our regularly scheduled show already in progress. So here's where we're at. First thing I did is I heated up this solder joint. There was just a little drip of solder right there. And with safety glasses on, while the solder was liquid, I blasted it with hot air, which blew the solder away from the joint. Some copper braided solder wick would have been better, but I don't have any. Then, using my Dremel with a dental carbide burr, I reached down into here and gently ground the head off of the rivets that are down in here. One there and one there. Trying to get where you can see it. See where I took the rivet out? Right there, the head of the rivet off. It was a flush rivet, so I was kind of grinding down into a concave hole. Then I pried with a screwdriver, and this whole unit has come apart from the center tube. So I'm gonna have to get this shaft and this gear out. So the next thing I'm gonna do is take the Dremel and grind the mushroomed head, this straked head, off of this shaft so that this shaft can come out. If I have to, I can get a dental burr that's a little more precise. But first I'm going to try hitting it with more of a standard sized carbide burr like so. We'll see how it does. If it's too grabby, I'll stop and reset and load up a dental burr. Well, at first blush, that seems like it worked okay. Okay, so I'm gently pulling the thing apart. Little flathead screwdriver to pry it apart. What I see now, if you look down in there, I've gotten the little bracket out and everything. It looks like the gear is too big to go through the hole. So what I'm going to do about that is I'm actually going to enlarge this hole a little bit and then I will just have to patch it back, find a way to make it clean when I'm done. Alright, that worked like I hoped. There's definitely room to get the gear out, at least in its broken state. And there we go. Okay, so just enlarged the hole a smidgen and got the messed up gear out. So if you see the gear, it's missing, what, give or take half of its teeth. I would love, in a perfect world, to not have to try to remove the shaft from out of the handle, because it's hard to imagine I can do that clean enough that it looks good. So I've just taken a measurement of this gear across its outer points and counted the teeth. From that I can go to Machinery's Handbook and figure out what kind of gear has an OD of 284 if the count of teeth is 12, and then I will know what I'm trying to make. Having looked at it closely, and I'm pretty sure you won't be able to see it on camera, but especially from this side, I can see this gear is a press fit onto here. So my plan at this point is pretty simple. I will press the gear off of this shaft, make a new one, turn the shaft back a little bit this direction to kind of its original specifications, but now, you know, a 1/16 or at the most an 1/8 of an inch shorter, press a new gear on and reassemble. So the effect is the knob will be an 1/8 of an inch, you know, its stick out from the body will be an 1/8 of an inch less than it used to be, but other than that it'll be pretty much identical as it came from the factory. So just as I hoped, it pressed right out of there and the gear separated from the shaft. As far as how to make the gear goes, I've decided a couple things. One is that I'm going to make the gear a lot taller than it used to be. In the original configuration, the gear was only, what is that, give or take a 1/16 of an inch thick, and engaging the rack that's going to go in it, it only engaged part way. It's part of the reason it broke off. So I'm going to make the gear probably fully a 1/4 inch thick. I have this piece of brass shaft from some kind of candlestick I found at Goodwill or some such thing. I have turned the whole thing down to precisely 5/16, and now I am turning this shoulder down to I've decided to do 290, which is what a 48 dot pitch gear would be. This spot is coming back to 290, and so now I'm just going to bring it across. So I'm going to turn this entire journal to 290, and then this piece can be cut off, mounted up on the mill, and the gear will be cut right here in this area. Quick measurement. If the material were extremely hot, then it would affect the diameter. Of course, things expand as they get hot. It's not even warm to the touch, so I think its diameter is fine. 290 on this end. That's close enough. So there it is. There is the gear blank prepared for use. Here I am manufacturing a gear hub on the lathe. This is a piece of water hardening tool steel, and I have in the tool holder a little bit. It's a V, precisely the shape of 40 degrees. So I've cut these 5 40-degree V-shaped rings, and this shape approximates a 48 dot pitch gear rack. Having measured the gear that came out of the lamp, I've decided it's either a 48 or a 50, Either one will work as long as I'm consistent, so I'm going to make it based on a 48 diametral pitch. The next thing I'm going to do is turn down a shoulder here and turn down there. And then we will mount this in the mill and cut some grooves in it so that these rings will actually act as gear cutters. I have it mounted now in this 4-way collet block. So in order to work on the next side, all I have to do is flip over the collet block, and then I'm ready for the next side. So now I have this nice round object with these little gear-shaped cutters sticking out of it. Now I can use this to cut the 48 pitch gear. First I have to harden this. Put it in here where we can concentrate the heat. Now I can start to see some red getting up into it. And once this is a bright orange, I will quench it straight down into the water. Alright. There it is, bright orange. Hot, hot, hot. I went to pick the thing up and it's still about as hot as a clothing iron. Yeah, I'm gonna get a good burn out of that. Should have had a glove on my other hand, shouldn't I? It's your fault. I was gonna explain what I was doing. That's why I wasn't paying attention. I forgive you. So if you ever do get a burn, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But the faster you can get an ice cube on the area, the more damage you can prevent. Even after you're burned, if you'll get an ice cube on the thing right away, it seems to limit the severity of the burn. It's almost like supercooling it after it's been superheated stops the tissue damage from being deeper or something. I don't know. Because I'm about to temper it, which is to say it will still be hard, but it will no longer be so brittle. The old books say temper it to a light straw. We're going to start watching the color of the steel. There it is. I'm not going to pick it up with my bare fingers this time. There, have a look. See the light straw color? So this part has now been hardened and tempered. This is now our gear cutter. So the way this gear cutter works, I now have the piece in my homemade dividing head with a 12 divider in it. And as you can see, the cutter cuts one groove at a time, but because it has multiple cutters in the shape of a rack, it's going to make its own meshing. It's going to cut not only the center tooth, but the shoulder teeth at the same time to make the thing mesh. This cutter can cut an infinite number of teeth. In fact, I'll use the same cutter to cut the gear rack itself. You may have seen this before. Homemade dividing head. I currently have a paper on here for 12 divisions. I'm simply running the cutter and then I loosen up the clamp and rotate it around to the next 12 line. Right there. I use this piece of paper a lot. It has both 12 and 8 and 6 and 4. This one's pretty useful, but here goes a run. I just complete that process 12 times and I have a gear. And there it is. A 12 tooth, 48 diametral pitch brass gear. Next I will put it in the lathe, drill out the center to fit the shaft appropriately, and then cut it to the appropriate width, and we'll reinstall. So here's the setup for cutting the gear rack. My blank is actually a piece of Schlage door hardware. It's like a lock plate where the bolt would go in. It is solid brass and it's just the right thickness, so that works great. I have mounted it in the vise and indicated it so that it's perfectly straight up and down. And now I just will run the cutter through, and then we can take our gear, 12-tooth gear, and voila. So here is our first look at our newly created gear rack and gear. 48 diametral pitch. This piece will be cut off, and then this will hold the wick so that when you turn the handle, the wick is either raised or lowered. So with the gear done, I'm about to do a little work on this shaft. So this is the knob back inside the chuck there. There's the knob. This is the shaft that goes in. The gear will ride right here. I need this journal to be a little longer. You know, I had to grind this end off to disassemble. So I will cut this shoulder back towards the chuck a little bit so that the journal sticks out longer so that I can peen it over to put this all back together. So in order to mount it up, I couldn't mount the shaft straight in the chuck, obviously, because it would hit the knob. So I took a big piece of aluminum, drilled it out to the same size as this shaft, which is an 1/8 inch, and then saw cut all the way through on this side, and then saw cut most of the way through on this side so that the two pieces hold together. But then when I put them in the chuck and clamp the thing down, it squeezes these halves together. So I've got it trued up and it's nice and tight, ready to cut that shoulder back. Just taking off a little bit just to extend that out. Okay, so just finished putting these screws in, which are the screws with the little nuts, number 2 screws they turned out to be. So that is bolted back in place. The shaft is connected to that little bracket by peening the end over. I left a little brass protruding, and I used a spring-loaded center punch like this. And I held the little shaft on the table and repeatedly did the spring-loaded center punch to peen the end over. If you ever seen one of these center punches, basically you just push in and then it makes a click noise and leaves an impression. So it's kind of like hitting it with a hammer. And I just did that, I don't know, 30 or 40 times until the brass mushroomed out on that shaft and locked it to that bracket. So now the bracket is attached to the tubing. I'll reach in there with a Dremel and grind those heads smooth so that the wick doesn't hang up. And so there's our gear rack. And there it is going up and down. So, the gear, which used to look, here's the old gear. The gear now looks like that. Ready to carry on, keep making the next pieces to get this thing back into service.